Welcome to Roundtable Mindset, the podcast where we seek to understand and share different perspectives in order to grow and challenge our own. And we encourage you, our guest, to do the same.
Each week we will pick a topic to discuss, sharing our own unique thoughts and insights. There will be times when we won't agree, and let's be real, that's probably going to be most of the time, and that's okay. We feel it's important to understand that we can live in this polarized world and still respect one another and even be friends. Welcome, guests, to another episode of the Roundtable Mindset. I'm Mahlon.
And this is Jamie.
And today we are going to be a little bit off script. And what I mean by that is we have a topic today that's probably going to feel the entire time. And it's coming from a food for thought topic that both Jamie and I, we have experience in, and we wanted to make sure we gave enough time to really vet it out and discuss it.
Yes. So this is like a food for thought episode. Yay!
I love these segments. I love food for thought.
It is one of my favorites, which I think is probably why it goes, halfway into our podcast sometimes, because we just find some really great things to talk about, and that's okay.
It is okay. And this one in particular, I think what's going to make this even more interesting is we both learned and were trained on these techniques that we're going to share that has to do with helping change your mindset so you can help change your perspective. And we both have a different angle to it, which I think is super fascinating as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably the coolest part of this is how we learned it in different ways and in different settings. And here we are, but they overlap and they cross so much. It's kind of a cool thing. But maybe we should stop like preluding the conversation and maybe just jump into the topic as we're like, so let's talk all about it without telling you what it is.
We are talking around it without even getting to it. So no, I agree. So Jamie, do you want to go ahead and maybe kick us off?
Sure. So, okay. That was sure, not for sure. Sorry.
You're evolving.
I couldn't help myself.
That's amazing.
I couldn't help myself. Okay. My work is in mental health, right? And we've kind of talked a little bit about what I do. And I probably still won't go into a ton of detail, but basically I work in peer support. And what that means is that I get to help people who have been in similar struggles, similar challenges, similar place. Why is that word so hard tonight? Similar places in life as me. Never the same, because everyone's experience is a little bit different, but I've learned tools along the way that have helped me reach my goals and, find some sense of like wellness and recovery, right? And just, I guess, for the general listener, recovery isn't just about substance use. Recovery can really be from anything, right? I mean, you have illness recovery, you have mental health recovery, you have all kinds of things. Anytime you have a hang up or a challenge that just keeps getting in your way, when you get through it, we call it recovery. So, in this process, I have learned about tools that I've used in order to get through the challenges and to get to a better space, right? So that's kind of what we're talking about today. So there's like 3 pieces to it. And I don't know what your training or whatever was called, but it kind of reminded me, it was probably a couple months ago. I was watching something and they were doing the serenity prayer, right? God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? And it kind of reminded me of these tools and how, the serenity prayer is used in like AA and NA and things like that in different recovery groups to really help you break down the steps of what you need to do in order to sustain recovery. And it's really like that shifting in your mind and that mindset from like an addiction mindset to a wellness mindset or a recovery mindset. And so that's kind of that's kind of where the inspiration came from for me, I guess, is to put these three things together, as these really are tools that have helped.
The training that I received, although it has some of the same terminologies and it has some of the same approaches, it really was focused in on specific aspects of these tools that I can use in more of a business setting.
Mm-hmm.
And so even what I'm hearing you talk right now and the inspiration you got from the Serenity Prayer, and I'm hearing you talk about, grant me the things, that I can't control. Really, my training was boiled down to, they used to call it circle of influence, circle of control, which basically is around identifying the things that you can influence to change, and compared to the things that you are in control of changing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just so amazing that even in the beginning intro that you just gave, yours sounds like it's a lot more well-rounded, where mine was more specific on, key business ideas that we were trying to sharpen. And again, I we'll get into this, but I've applied some of those in other areas of my life that I wasn't officially trained on. I'm using air quotes. So I'm super interested and exciting to kind of hear your training and the things that you went through, because like I said, it sounded like it's a lot more well-rounded training than I received. I didn't mean to stop your train of thought there. I just wanted to kind of put that contrast in there.
Well, what's interesting is that your business is a business. And so bringing these tools that apply to business in is going to be about increasing the bottom line and making the business more effective and efficient, right? Well, when you apply these things to your life, and you did that, you took the applications and you applied them elsewhere, and you found that they really are true throughout, your experiences and relationships. But that is the core of my work, is to say, okay, what do you need to do to, really shift things and turn life into exactly what you want it to be. And so that's kind of it's just interesting that you talked about this stuff in a business mindset too. It's just you really surprised me when you showed me what you had worked with at work. So
and it's so helpful that, like I said, we were only trained to use it for our careers and the jobs that we were performing, but how easy it was to move that over into the personal aspects of my life, into other relationships. And I even took it further than what I was trained on, even at work, because the application of these tools they're easy. And you can, once you start using them, you can start seeing more opportunities where you can plug them in at, which I thought was super convenient, because again, you're given these keys to use, and you're only shown one application, and suddenly you start understanding these keys fit a lot of different locks in your life, and you can't help but start trying them out and saying, oh, I wonder what happens if I apply it over here. And it's been fun. And I think I've talked about that in previous conversations, is that these are all part of the things that I'm doing to kind of expand my horizons and understand that it's not just about me, and really start changing my mindset. This was the building blocks for me. And this is what I was introduced very early on in my career. That was the catalyst for that change. And so I'm really excited to talk about it. And I'm really excited to kind of contrast it to what you've learned.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the cool part of these tools, is that they really, and really kind of food for thought in general. I tease you all the time about finding inspiration, in the toothpaste, but for real though, I mean, when you start paying attention, you can find those things that inspire us to do better and to be better all over the place, So it's really cool that you did that without someone telling you to. You know what I mean? Like, this could apply elsewhere. It's awesome. So there's really three tools, I guess, that I would call out independently, right? So the first one is radical acceptance. The second one is stages of change. And the third one is circles of control. And those three things together, I can easily say, has brought me to the space that I am right now in my life. So that first one, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change. I remember being in a really, really low place in life. I had just, we kind of talked about it a little bit before, I had just moved out on my own with my two kids, became a single mom. It was easily the hardest time in life. And I really had spent a lot of years in my marriage trying to control things that really weren't mine to control. And so, there was some addiction and things like that. And I did everything I could to make it different. And in that space, when I had left on my own, I found myself like just feeling so out of control. And it was scary. It was the scariest thing I think I had ever experienced up till that point. And so a friend of mine gave me this list. This list, here you go. This is what you need, right? And it was called radical acceptance. And it was this concept. I think it's from a book. I'm not entirely certain. But it was this list of things that, like, tools to help you radically accept things that were absolutely unacceptable. And that's where I found myself in that space, was like, this was not acceptable. The outcome of my failed marriage was not acceptable. Having two kids that were going to grow up in a single parent home was absolutely unacceptable. The fact that I had failed was absolutely unacceptable. All these things it was like, no, nope, nope, nope. And I don't know if you've found yourself in a space like that. Have you ever just been in a space where you tried everything you could to make the outcome what you wanted it to be and you just couldn't get it there?
You just pretty much outlined the first 20 years of my existence. So yes, I mean, there's countless examples that I can go back and pull from to say there were times when I was trying to control an outcome that wasn't mine to control. That no matter what I did, I was never going to affect the outcome, even though I might have to live through the outcome. And again, I don't want to confuse everybody, because I understand we're bringing our two lenses together on the same material. But I will say that the beginning of when you broke yours up into three, I could kind of see the three circles that my training went on to. But the first thing that we had to do was exercises and becoming self-aware, because I know that when I was presented this material and you tell me there's certain things that you can control in your life, there's certain things that you can influence, and there's certain things that you have to just be a casual observer, and you have no influence and you have no control. When I heard those, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And I can identify those. What was interesting is that the exercises they took us through was to make us start becoming more self-aware. And what that did was it showed me that although I might conceptualize what that means in my mind, and I might be able to identify it, I wasn't self-aware enough about who I was as a person to know how I would interact within those three circles. So I was fooling myself to say, oh yeah, I can identify the things that I can't control. I can identify the things that I can influence, and I can identify the things that I control. I was being self-delusional because I hadn't been working on my self-awareness. Because in reality, what I was doing is I was making my circle of control a lot bigger than all my other circles, because that's the personality within me. I like to control my environment. I like to control situations. I like to control outcomes. And it wasn't until this exercises came on that I started realizing that I was trying to control, I was trying to influence situations that I would never be able to do that, but it was because I wasn't self-aware enough. So, as I'm hearing you talk, I'm seeing where this, with my training, is kind of filling in some of those gaps. But I just wanted to kind of put that out there to say, does that match anything with what you're training? Because it sounds like it did, but mine was probably more called out.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because I think it was in that moment right there when I realized that I was trying to control things that I had no business trying to control. That was the moment that I had to figure out, okay, no, I do need to accept things that are unacceptable. Things that I have no business in even trying to control, I have to just accept them as what they are, right? So if you think about some of can you think about some of those situations where it's just outside of your control completely? I've mentioned divorce. We've talked in the past about death of a loved one, losing a job, We have no say in any of those things, right?
Well, and I even go to collaboration with individuals. I have no business controlling how the other person chooses to work with me or chooses to collaborate. And that was one of the things in this training that we, again, becoming self-aware, learning all these steps. I quickly identified there was times I was moving people out of the way because I didn't think they were collaborating with me the way they should be. And I was trying to control that.
Mm-hmm.
And I started understanding something as simple as, hey, let's work together. But if I didn't see you working in the way that I thought you should have been working or how you were collaborating, I just started taking over. And that was one of the first things that I started realizing was that I need to change that about myself. I was taking that responsibility as if it was something that I should have had. And I was investing so much energy into these things that, quite frankly, I think I'm controlling. And all I'm doing is irritating myself and other people. And I'm really not affecting the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's really cool about all these tools that we're learning is that I also started identifying the energy that I was putting in, the misguided energy that I was putting into all these other things that, quite frankly, I shouldn't have been investing in. And it started changing the landscape of my life, first professionally, and then started leaking in to my personal as I was applying them in other areas of my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and if you think about that space of like trying to control things that really you can't, right? I think those are the times that we think like, why me? Why is this happening to me? Or it's that person is the problem, or this isn't fair. This shouldn't be happening, those kind of things. And that's really where I found myself in this really dark time. I was like, no, this is not, no, like absolutely resisting this, right? You know what that did for me personally? Like, I was such a mess. I was crying all the time and I was trying to, my brain was full of what do I do next? What's the next move? What's going to happen? The amount of anxiety and frustration that was happening inside of me as I'm trying to hang on to some semblance of controlling what the outcome of my life was going to look like when I had no ability to, was devastating. It was so hard. And thankfully at that time I had a really great support system to help me through some of that stuff. And the person that handed me radical acceptance, right? But I think it's important. One piece that I always have to remind myself is that it's important to remember that radical acceptance isn't approval. It's not passive. It's not anti-change. It is just saying it is what it is, right? And I have to accept that it is what it is.
I don't know about you, but I do want to just highlight something really quick for me. When I was learning that concept, it was really easy for me to go to the point of, but then I'm failing. If I don't control this, if I don't make sure the outcome is what it needs to be, then I'm failing. And that was a hard mindset for me to get over, Jamie, because to me, I had to let some things fail. And it wasn't even like I was making them successful. What I was doing is I was overcompensating by making sure these other aspects were done above and beyond what was even asked of me. And it was masking the fact that these things that I was trying to fix, that I had no control over, but I thought I did. What it was doing, it was masking the fact that those things still failed, but I had all these other opportunities in these other areas professionally that I was overcompensating, that it masked that. And so for me, the struggle here was to identify the fact that I'm not going to do that anymore, which means those failures are going to become more prevalent. And in turn, that made me feel like a failure. And that was a hard thing to overcome. And I resisted that for a very long time because I equated my success with the success of what other people were doing. And I had to untangle that as well. And that was hard for me.
Yeah. Well, and, imagine putting a similar lens then on, I don't know how much it was at the time, a 15-year marriage, like, oh, I failed. Hi, thank you. Like I swore I was never going to get a divorce. And I swore that was never, I was never going to put my kids through that. And here I was doing exactly what I swore I would never do. Later, I found that I accepted things that I never thought I would accept. And so it took time. It took a long time. After even just accepting this horrible thing, it took a long time to even reconcile that by leaving a marriage that was not healthy and was pretty toxic at that point, I actually was succeeding because I had stopped accepting things that I swore I never would. You know what I mean? So it was interesting, the learning that I did through that process.
Well, I just had a question for you. I don't know from radical acceptance. Again, it's a different terminology, but do you have any, like, were there steps that you were taught or you went through? Like, I'm just trying to understand, how do they express using radical acceptance, and what does that look like? And do they give you kind of like a guardrail that you could use in your everyday life and the situations at work?
Yes. I do. You remember? Okay, I'm not going to name any names. There was a radio show, super conservative radio talk show, and it was a doctor, and people would call and ask this doctor for advice. And they would be like, how do I accept this really hard thing? And she used to say, what do you mean? You just accept it. And so I was always like, okay, you just accept it. Well, thankfully, someone wrote a book about radical acceptance that had a few more steps to it, because that never made sense to me. Like, how do you just accept this thing, right? Do you know the radio show I'm talking about? We're not going to name
Oh,
names.
I do.
Okay, good.
I used to listen to it faithfully. But no,
Me too.
And before you go, before you get in there, like, that's exactly what I was struggling with. It's like, you don't have to see that as a failure because that's not your failure. But the last 5 years, I've been making it about my success, and now you want me to untangle it. How do you do that? And at first, I was like, I was hearing them say the exact same thing that radio show was saying. Well, you just accept it. Well, there's a huge chasm between where I'm at now and me learning what that means to say just accept it. And so I'm glad to hear, and I do have some steps too, but I'm glad to hear that your training had a little bit more details on how you approach that, because it was very daunting to hear that at first. And I was like, I'll never get there. I can't even recognize at this point some of the things that I'm taking on that I shouldn't be, and let alone you want me to just learn to just accept it and be like, oh, well, and move on. And it was a very trying time for me.
Yeah. Well, and thankfully, there was no training. There was no training on this for me. This was my life. Like, I was living this. And I'm like, how? Okay, well, the good doctor on the radio show says I just accept it and move on, right? And it wasn't doing it for me. And so, really it first came with an understanding of what is radical acceptance. What does that mean? And what it means is it's like full, complete, and total acceptance in your mind, your body, your heart, your soul, your emotional life. You accept it. It's total all the way acceptance. It's not, I'll accept a piece of this and I'm not accepting that. It is complete acceptance. And the biggest thing, when I stopped fighting reality, and that's what it was. It was like I had to realize that this thing is reality. The end of this thing is reality. And when I stop fighting that and I can accept reality as not the way I want it, then I can start letting go of the feelings, the bitterness, the anger, all of the things. And sometimes I had to do it a lot. Like, I had to accept it and let it go over and over and over again. It looked like me feeling some sort of way and having to remind myself, nope, this isn't a bad dream. You woke up, you did not wake up this morning from a terrible dream and suddenly you're going to go be married again. Nope, this is done and I need to accept this. Sometimes it meant just crying my guts out and just letting that emotion in, because part of fighting it and part of not practicing radical acceptance is not accepting the emotions that go with it. So it took me a long time to even grieve the relationship that I had lost, because I was like, nope, we're just moving forward. Just give it some time. It'll be fine. You know what I mean? So sometimes it means letting those awful feelings flood over you. And sometimes it means being really angry. And sometimes it means all of those things. It's part of the process of accepting what's real and letting go of what you want.
I can relate to that in so many different ways. Some of the things, so I'm gonna walk you through one exercise that happened at work for me, and this was very eye-opening and very humbling for me at the same time. So we were going through this training, and my leader was there going through it with us. I had an example of what I was expecting to control, what I was thinking was in my circle of control, because that was one of the exercises they wanted us to start with before we started really digging into these tools. Part of these being self-aware was understanding enough of the circle of control, circle of influence, and then outside of that, which is the third circle. I can't remember what they named it. I call it the casual observer because there's really nothing you can do. And so taking the base information of what all of those three circles were, I started writing in what I believed in my life that I had control over, what I had influence over, and what I was a casual observer of. And I'll never forget that I had list after list of stuff in my control, a few things in my influence, and one thing in my casual observer. And part of the exercise that we had to go through is we had to go and start explaining to people why we put the things in each of these circles. And I'll never forget, I got paired up with my supervisor, which was horrible and probably the best way to learn this all at once, because
awkward.
You want to talk about real life feedback, like immediate feedback. I was getting it.
Like, is this a training or a job evaluation? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, woo. And I can't remember exactly what I put down, but I believe it had something to do with collaboration with somebody and how I was having to control and take over some of the work because we had a deadline that needed to be met. And I remember going through all these, circumstances and these situations, and I finally got done with all of my control. And, my manager was pushing on me and was saying, so you believe that you control all of that? Are there anything that you can just influence? You believe you have to control all of it? And I said, yes. And where she started helping me is she said, okay, Mahlon, but who asked you to do that?
Oh, yeah.
I was like,
isn't that a hard question? Ooh.
Oh, I was like, well, it needed to be done. And she then came back and said, okay, it needs to be done, but who said you were the one that needed to do it? And then she kept going, Jamie. And she said, not only that, Mahlon, but who says you're the right person to do it? Exactly.
Okay, you earned your paycheck today. Can you lay off?
Right. I was like, and again, it was hard, and it was a good thing it was an exercise and it wasn't a job evaluation. But that really was the beginning of shattering and me understanding my self-awareness to say, I don't even understand enough to say, well, it has to be done. So who else would it be but me? And so, again, that was just an example of one of the exercises they took us through where I was starting to break down those barriers that, you're even talking about in a very personal way. I'm looking at it from a less personal way, but still a very impactful process to go through to say, you're taking all this on as if you should control it. And whoever asked you to do that? And the one that stuck in my mind the most is, who's to say you're the right person to do it? And that is what blew me away.
Mic drop. Yeah, that's it's funny because I can remember times that was the exact same thing that was given to me in a whole different scenario. But, wow, Jamie, you really do think highly of yourself if you think you have the control over everything. And I will just admit before all of you, hi, I'm Jamie, and I'm a recovering control freak. So now that that's out in the open, let's just move on.
You are party of two, please. Party of two.
Well, and I think that's a big portion of this piece of it. Radical acceptance is really about understanding that you don't have control over everything and owning the fact that, because I don't know about you, but if I look back in my life and I look at all of the things that I tried to control, it was typically to guard myself from feeling pain. It was typically to guard myself from being afraid or put in a position that I was afraid to be in or uncomfortable in or whatever, right? 90% of the time, that is exactly why I tried to control things. So, to go through the process and understand, and this took me a long time to figure out, but I can look back now and say that was one of the most painful things I've ever experienced. And I'm okay. And I'm okay. And life was worth living even while I was in the middle of that horrible experience. And I'm okay. So that's I think that's how you know when you did radical acceptance right. Now, have I had to go back there? Yeah, I've had to go back there. I've had to go back and remind myself, like, nope, I can't control what the other party does any more now than I could while I was living in the same household, right? Like, it just is what it is. And I can't tell you how freeing that feeling is when you can sit here and say, it is what it is. And it's not like a bitter, snarky little comment, because I say that sometimes too. Well, it is what it is, whatever, but when you can fully say, it is what it is and I'm okay, it is absolutely freeing. And that is a powerful thing if you can recognize it and get through it. So,
well, and if I can just maybe expand on that just a second, one of the greatest, using these techniques, one of the greatest opportunities I had was getting to the point where I asked myself the question, am I the right person? Am I the right person to do this? Am I the right person to control this situation? Am I the right person to even influence this situation?
Did someone ask you to control it?
Exactly. And I remember there was a time when my supervisor came to me, and it was probably a year or two after we did this exercise. And again, this sounds like I'm boasting. I don't know how else to say this, but I meet my deadlines on my work. I make sure I get things done when I'm supposed to. And I remember my boss came to me and was trying to give me some work to get done because the deadline was approaching and they were going to miss it and they didn't want to miss it. So they're like, hey, Mahlon, we need you to step in. And I remember I had the opportunity to say, am I the right person for me to step in and do this work? And it kind of caught her off guard a little bit because she had to take a step back, and she said, I don't know if you are. I think we need someone to cross it across the finish line, and that's what you do. And so that's what we need. And I said, well, if you're comfortable with just having something finished, that's one thing. But if you're wanting quality, I think that you might need to be going to somebody else that knows a lot more about the process, about the business unit, about the product, in order to get this across not only as on time as possible, but as correct as you need it. And that was a cool moment for me because that was growth. Because a year ago, 2 years ago, I would have been like, not even asking questions, jumping in, owning all this, pulling all the levers, assuming all that responsibility, all of that stress, all of that control. And now it allowed me to, in a healthy way, question that and go back and say, okay, but am I the right person for this? Or am I just a body that you need? And is that the right approach? And the answer was no, it wasn't, because they needed something that was quality. They needed something to be functional. They would like to have it on time, but it was more important to have something working than just something done. And I remember I reflect back on that. And again, my one-on-one with my boss, I brought that up, and that was a huge growth moment. So, it's kind of cool. We've been talking about how do we accept it? How do we learn to go through it? It's difficult. But it's also really kind of cool when you can start applying that radical acceptance in a positive way in situations in your life. And that was one of the first ones that I really got to see that firsthand. And that was awesome. So I just wanted to share that too.
Yeah, that's a good example of radical acceptance at work. Now, I will be really surprised if this next tool, the stages of change, if that's something that you've talked about at work, because I don't know I don't know that I hadn't really encountered this much until I started doing the work that I do now. So let me just ask, have you ever heard of the stages of change? Is that something you've worked with at all?
The term doesn't sound familiar. I think I can kind of, well, the answer is no, I haven't. Again, my training was mostly around focusing on the three circles, one of it being control, one of being influence, and one being, I'll call casual observer. Now, I'm wondering, and I'm kind of excited to hear what this, this is from your lens, because I'm wondering if we did touch on them, we just didn't have a name to it.
Gotcha.
But no, I haven't used it.
Okay. So the stages of change are kind of what always amazed me when I learned this. And this I did learn in a staffing. What amazed me is how I could absolutely see myself in every single one of those stages in different changes that I had tried to make, failed to make, took several times to try and make, over and over and over again, and how true they really rang in the process that we as people go through in making a change. So the very first stage of the stages of change is pre-contemplation. And kind of the benchmark of pre-contemplation is like, you have no idea that you need to make a change. Like, there's no problem. I am fine. Everyone around you might see that shopping's a problem, but I don't see shopping as a problem, so I'm just fine, right? So pre-contemplation, you're completely blind to this need for a change. I kind of, when I talk about this and try to give an example, I use dieting as an example, because a lot of people will go through that cycle of dieting, right? Like, I'm gonna make all these things, I'm gonna do all this, I'm gonna meal prep, I'm gonna do these things. And then, something happens and we have to start back from square one. So maybe think of that as we're kind of going through these, right? So I like cake. I like cake a lot. And eating cake is not a problem for me. It's fine. I can have cake and it's fine, right? So, so I enjoy cake and I'm going to have cake. Then I go to a meeting in a official building with the steepest set of stairs I have ever seen in my life. So instead of taking the steepest set of stairs I have ever taken in my life, I'm going to take the elevator, only to find out that elevator is by far the most scary piece of technology I have ever been in my life, because I'm pretty sure it was built in 1901 or something. Like, it was the scariest elevator ever. So I'm not taking the elevator because I might die. And so I have to take the stairs, and then I might die. By the time I get halfway up the stairs in this little courthouse, in this tiny little town with the courthouse built in 1902 or something, I think I'm going to die. And suddenly I'm like, oh, this is not working for me. I have a problem. Maybe cake is my problem, right?
Now you're just in denial.
Right. No. Now we're in contemplation. What is the problem? What do I need to change, right? That's when we start thinking about those changes. Are you seeing yourself in this process yet?
Immediately we didn't talk about that term, but we also touched on some of the ways that you can, and it was part of the self-awareness exercises that we did, was how do you recognize there's a change that you need to make? And one of the biggest indicators or motivators was pain. So if you experience pain, you're more apt to want to put that, stop the pain. And if you're uncomfortable, you want to make sure you stop being uncomfortable. So we learned to get us into that state of change that you're talking about. The greatest motivator you can have is pain. I'm in a business sense, so I'm not talking physical pain like your example, but I'm talking about, if you are being burnt out, if you are constantly picking up other people's work, if you working and you never feel like you get anywhere, those are all examples of things that might start putting you into that space to say, hey, I need to make a change. So yeah, I can start seeing some parallels, although we didn't call it exactly the same thing, but that's the closest that I can relate to what you're talking about.
Well, and thank you for teeing that up for me, because quite literally, I would go one further to say that nothing is going to cause us to even consider that there's a change that needs to be made until there's discomfort, until it's no longer working for us, right? And that's what makes us see, okay, maybe I need to do something different here. So once you get through the contemplation stage, I've contemplated why I wanted to die. By the time I got to the top of the steps, it must be the cake. So now I have to start making a plan. What am I going to do about this? How am I going to make it different? What steps do I need to take? I start learning about the problem. I start learning about other ways to deal with the things. And it's preparation. I'm preparing to make a change. In this space, I might start asking my friends, like, hey, do you have any recipes for cake that is low sugar? Or what gym do you go to? Maybe I should go to a gym. Do you meal prep? What does that look like? Would you want to go to a gym with me? I want to walk every other night. Do you want to go? Starting to try on that change and ask others for support in that change is part of preparation. We learn who our supports are going to be during that change in preparation. And then guess what?
Can I stop you right there?
Absolutely.
So, sorry, the parallel for me, we never called it preparation of change, but we started talking about how do you start setting goals. So again, from my perspective, the training was, okay, so pain, discomfort, you recognize there's a problem. Well, they called it like you don't want to boil the ocean or eat an elephant in one bite. I don't know if you've heard those examples before. Mm-hmm. So, and really recognizing there's a problem, that's great. But now what do you do? And a lot of times people get overwhelmed when they've identified a problem, but it's so daunting that you're like, okay, but I don't know how to fix it. So I'm just going to go back to where I was in that denial stage because, yeah, I've identified a problem, but there's no way that I can solve it. And so what they took us through was how do you start breaking down that problem into smaller pieces where you can start having some of those successes of your, and they did that through goal setting. And by the time, you pick a little piece of it off and you work towards it and then you're successful, it feeds in that desire to keep going. And then it also starts reducing what was a monumental task now starts getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Plus you're getting the momentum of each of these successes that are kind of moving you forward. And before long, what was seeming impossible has now been accomplished. And so that to me was a piece that you were talking about. We just called it, planning and goal setting and kind of through different examples, how you can recognize the problem and then break it down so you can achieve it. And one of the things that I had to learn from that is that sometimes these goals, they're not meant to be solved, overnight. And that was where some of my problem was too. I would start identifying these things that had to change. I wanted that to be tomorrow. And I had to learn that, just because I identified some pain or some discomfort doesn't mean that goes away right away. It means that's something I'm working towards. And that's where these, the goal setting and the plans come into place. But that was some acceptance that I had to do as well, to say, just because I've identified the source of the pain and discomfort doesn't mean it goes away tomorrow. It means I might have to learn how to live with it as I am reducing it and eventually eliminating it, which was a hard concept to kind of grapple with at the same time. Because I was super excited to say, okay, I'm now understanding these areas that I need to change. I want to change them tomorrow. Then you start applying that self-awareness. There's some of them I couldn't change by tomorrow because although it was happening to me, I might have just been an influencer to them. I couldn't just change it because I wanted to. So that was really kind of interesting to see that as well as we were going through that second process.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's important to remember that Without the preparation stage, you're not setting yourself up for success anyway. Like, you really have to have a plan. If you want to make a major change, you really need a plan. And you need a plan to cope with the challenges or barriers that you discover along the way too. Like, it's not all going to be step A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. Yay, now we're different, right? Like, now I don't struggle when I walk up the stairs anymore. Okay. So,
If you're like, if for me, it was take 2 steps forward, take 1 step back, take 3 steps forward, take 1 step back. Like, there was a constant like ebb and flow, especially at the beginning because it was all so new. But yeah, even now, I mean, there's a lot of times that I take a couple steps forward and then I go backwards sometimes.
Mhm.
And I think what you do with when you start going backwards, do you give up? Do you go back to the start? Do you just throw in the towel, or do you just say, you know what? I accept that that didn't go very well, but I'm going to keep pushing forward, and you learn from it and you grow.
Oh, you foreshadow things to come, my friend. So, after we've prepared for the change, we enact the change, right? Now it's time for action. We are actively doing the things we need to do to make a change. So, typically in this stage, it requires forethought, it requires planning, it requires reinforcing the positive things that are coming from that change, right? This is where we start feeling those small victories that you talked about. And those victories give us the momentum to keep going. You know, we feel better, we're doing better. I can make it 3/4 of the way up the stairs at that courthouse instead of half the way up the stairs before I have to stop and take a breath. Whatever that measurement looks like, right? Like, we start seeing those positive changes. When we are done having to put concerted effort into maintaining these changes, when it just becomes natural, that's when we enter maintenance. This is a stage where we have achieved the goals, and really we're just working at maintaining those goals and fine tuning things, and maybe adding to it, maybe upping those goals and changing it a bit. But it comes so much easier at this point. At this point, I have been going to the gym on a regular basis, and I enjoy cake during celebrations, not on a random Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. But you learn to enjoy things and maintain that change.
So I think it's really funny to just kind of add my experience in there. They did rewards. So as you're going through those, breaking down the big problems and doing the plan and the goals, give yourself rewards on each of those goals. So it's kind of that incentive, right?
Mhm.
And the piece that helped me the most was in the maintenance. I think you called it maintenance. We were to get an accountability partner. So somebody who we could go to say, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what's happening. They are there to kind of say, okay, Mahlon, are you trying to control things again that you're not supposed to? Or they're there to ask the hard questions to say, who asked you to do that? Or are you the best person? So guess who I picked as my accountability partner?
Your boss.
My boss? Just because that realness, I needed that. But that was very helpful because when I'm going through it, and you've been doing this for a while, it's nice to have somebody come alongside to say, okay, I'm here to help you. Remember, you asked me to help you. And now I'm going to hold up a mirror in front of you to really reflect what's going on. And you're not going to like it, but you're going to say thank you. And so for my training, that's what we had to do. We did accountability partner, somebody that we can kind of plug into. It was weekly at first, and then it eventually grew, as we were getting better and we were using these concepts and we were changing our mindset. It went from weekly meetings to we eventually just met once a quarter, and it was a very useful situation to be in partnership because it was that real talk that we need, and that's kind of what I'm hearing you say too. Mm-hmm. Is there's that accountability to kind of maintain that. Sometimes that means you need help. And sometimes that means you need a different perspective to kind of come alongside you and say, hey, you're kind of going back to your old ways. You might not be seeing it, but I'm here to show you that that's what's happening.
Yep. Well, and again, to foreshadow, thank you for that. Lapse and relapse is the last stage of the stages of change.
This is where Mahlon lives. I just want you to know that. This is my home.
Well, there's this saying. There's a saying in peer support that I hear a lot, which is relapse is part of recovery. And to understand that by relapsing or lapsing, while you are in the midst of recovery or in the midst of making that change, it gives us an opportunity to learn. We get to learn about a trigger. We get to learn about an obstacle. We get to learn about a stumbling block that we didn't consider previously, which helps us make a plan to avoid it in the future or to deal with it better in the future. And so when relapse happens, you can go all the way back to pre-contemplation if you choose. That would be like relapse. If a lapse happens, maybe you go back into preparation. Maybe you just need to go brush up those tools and start there. I think the way people move through this process is completely different per person, and it's completely different per challenge or thing that we need to change. Whatever the problematic behavior is, it might be a very different process. You could spend about, I don't know, an hour in pre-contemplation and then be like, no, you're right. That's crap. I shouldn't be doing that. And then go through contemplation straight to action. It really depends on each person. I think what has been so beneficial in this process for me specifically has been, especially as I'm trying to be less of a control freak, is to notice myself in these cycles with even trying to control things that aren't mine to control. But again, even like the dieting cycle, oh my goodness, can I just watch myself do this? The good thing about when you learn about the stages of change is it helps you be more intentional, and it makes me accountable to me also. It helped me get to a space where I realized radical acceptance, part of that is saying, okay, I might be feeling this and it might be really hard, but I have the ability to do something to make it different and to take control of it and say, okay, as we're talking about not controlling things, I'm going to talk about controlling it, but to say I can do something different.
Well, the closest thing that I can come to from my perspective from that relapse is we did things called self-evaluations. So they encouraged us to, and I think I did mine monthly, where you kind of evaluated the process. You evaluated these different mindsets and these tools that we learned. And we had to do self-assessments on ourselves to say, how well are we doing? Where are we succeeding? Where are we falling short? What part of the process are we excelling? What part of the process do we need more improvement in, and we need to spend more time? And what was really great about this, and it kind of tied back into the collaboration with the individual, we asked them the mentoring, is we had to give our self-evaluations over to that individual to kind of look through and have that objective mindset to look at that and say, okay, I'm more removed than you are. You did a self-evaluation. Let me see how close to the truth you are. And that was really helpful. But we didn't have a concept of relapse, but that was probably the closest thing that I could relate to what you're talking about, if that makes any sense.
Well, and it's funny because what you're saying even emphasizes the need and the value for having positive support people around you, to be able to have those people around you to help you reevaluate as you're doing self-reflection to say, okay, where did I go wrong? What do I need to do next? If you have the healthy support system to do that, it makes the process a lot easier. So that was a second tool for me that was hugely beneficial in making life changes. It's so interesting, though, that you can really relate it to what you were doing at work, too. It's just kind of, see here, I think, oh, we have the market and peer support. Nope.
Well, what's really cool is how versatile this is. I mean, our fields couldn't be any different from one another. And then you add our personal lives on top of it, and look how well this all fits into all of it. Yes, we might be calling pieces of it something different, or expanding on a piece of it, emphasizing it and expanding different pieces at different times. But really, when you take a step back, it's virtually the same thing. And how cool that we get to apply it in so many different areas.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we talked about serenity, to accept the things that we cannot change, the courage to change the things that we can. And now I want to talk a little bit about the wisdom to know the difference, because I think that's the hardest for me. I'm not gonna qualify this for everyone. For me, that has been the hardest thing to realize, is to understand where I have business trying to control something and where I have no business trying to control something, right? So I want you to imagine with me, and I think this is the one that relates most directly to what you learned too, right? So imagine with me, if you will, a bullseye where there is a tiny little circle in the middle. There is a larger circle around that tiny circle. And then there is a really huge, massive, universe-sized circle around that. Okay? So it's a bullseye, but it's an exaggerated bullseye. Okay? So in the middle, in that tiny, tiny, tiny little circle, are all the things that we can control. They all fit in that tiny, tiny little space. Do you have any idea what might be in that tiny, tiny little circle?
Well, I'm going back to my training, and I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. But it was all the things that I can personally, that impacts me or touches me, or I have been given the responsibility to control. So it was all things about how I interact with individuals, how I respond to somebody, how I control my temper, or how I choose to, believe if somebody comes to me, they mean the best of intentions, how I hear them and what they're saying. These are the things that I can control. That's what would be in that little circle. And I'm laughing because what you're describing now is literally those things I've been talking about: the circle of influence, the circle of control, and then the circle, what I call, of casual observing.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the same exercises that I think you're talking about that they took us through. And each circle, when we got through the end, remember when I said my circle of control was the biggest, I had the most things in it? At the end of the training, it was funny because that was actually the smallest circle. And that drove me absolutely nuts.
Yes. Well, and really, it's because we use a lot of words maybe to describe things that we can control. We also tend to think we have control over things that we really don't have control. So if I could boil it down to 3 words, I have 3 words that would fit in that tiny, tiny little circle. And normally I have to draw the circle a lot bigger than it actually should be, just to be able to write these words in there, because really these are very tiny numbers of things. So my thoughts, my feelings, and my actions. Those are the only 3 things I can control. Now, when my friend, who previously had given me the radical acceptance, brought this to me later, okay, like, here, you deal with this one, and now we're going to bring you circles of control. Let's learn something new. When she brought this to me, I challenged that thought. Like, no, there are so many more things in my control than just my thoughts, my feelings, and my actions. Well, like what? Well, my car. I control where my car goes. I can control the speed that my car travels at. And my friend said, what if your car breaks down? Well, I can fix it. Well, right. But what if they don't have the part? And so it all just started like, oh my God, like it spiraled out of control for me. Like my whole world flew into a million pieces. And I'm like, wait a minute. I can control my kids. And then she laughed at me because
Right. And all the parents that are listening are laughing right now too.
Right.
That's funny.
Well, and my kids were fairly young at that time, and she had teenage children, and she's like, "Oh, just wait. Your children will make sure you know exactly how little control you have over children." Right. So after going through that exercise, I had to radically accept that there were only three things that I can control, and that's my thoughts, my feelings, and my actions. And oftentimes my thoughts shape my feelings, and my feelings often feed my actions. And that little cascade really started to unravel things for me too. So we have in the tiny middle circle, the very, very tiny, I mean, if you guys can imagine the tiniest little circle you can think of,
It's
that's
basically a dot.
pretty much in the grand scheme of life, the universe, and everything, it is a dot. Yes. So outside of the circle of control, around the circle of control is our circle of influence. These are things that we can influence. We may be able to influence. That is a qualifying question, or a qualifying statement too, that probably should be emphasized. We may be able to influence these things, but we definitely have no control over these things. So as you think about that, what do I have influence in, but no control? What does that look like for you? What's in that little next bigger circle?
So the next bigger circle for me would be things, I mean, most of my job is in this circle because I don't have any, I work with the business partners who make the decisions of what they're going after. I can influence that by bringing them facts and abilities that the IT can produce for them. I can also bring in diagrams and other test cases that we can look at to say that why this is more important than others or why we should go a certain way. But at the end of the day, I don't make the decision. I can help influence it, but that's out of my control. So that's basically my job. My job is living in this space where I influence that part of it. The other aspect of it is informal leadership. So times that I have to be a leader to someone who I'm not technically their leader, it's an informal leadership. Informal leader is what they call it. And that is around how do you influence somebody who you really don't have any ability to really control the outcome, but you're trying to get them to be coming along to the project, doing what they're supposed to be doing, helping them grow in their profession, their skill. So those are the two things that come to my mind when we talk about the circle of influence. Things that I really, at the end of the day, I can't control the outcome, but I can help influence what that outcome could be.
Mm-hmm. So in my world, in the circle of influence, there are things like my job. I have some influence in my job. If the agency that I work for closes tomorrow, I have no control over that, right? But I can influence my job by being a good performer, by doing the things that I need to do and things like that. My housing, I have some influence in my housing. I decide how my house is kept. I decide how I pay my bills. I decide those kind of things. But if lightning strikes my house and it burns to the ground, I have no control over that. So I do have some influence, but no control. This is a place, too, that I find a lot of my interpersonal relationships. My children. My children are within my circle of influence as long as they allow me to be, as long as they decide to be, right? So, and the interesting thing about kids, something that I always found interesting about kids is I feel like kids are much closer to our circle of control in the beginning of their lives. And as they grow older, they slowly drift out of our circle of influence and begin to move into that outer circle that we'll talk about here in a minute. But in learning this is where I learned about marriage. My spouse can be in my circle of influence. They're never in my circle of control. And they can often be outside of my influence and outside of my control. And that's the reality of most relationships. So what's interesting about what you're talking about, though, is how I think this is where that manipulation thing we talked about last week comes in. Like this circle of influence is where we get to influence the outcome of different things if we're allowed to. Oftentimes, it really is allowed by another person, whether we get to influence in this space or not.
Well, it's really interesting because the training I did, they have a terminology they call the haves and the bees. and that's BE, not as in the animal. And it was kind of a different way that you can see, which circle that you're in. Are you in the circle of control? Or are you in the circle of influence? And so, just to share that here, they had examples like, I can be more loving, or I can be wise, I can be more creative, I can be more cooperative, I can be more resourceful. So these are things that helps you recognize where you have an influence to change. Which again, I know it's not all inclusive or encompassing, but I thought it was kind of an interesting way to start seeing the difference between level of circle of control and circle of influence. Because when I first learned these, that was something that I had a hard time distinguishing. Where does that one end and the other one begin? Because some of them, where my arguments came, is I could put something in both of those spots. So I'll use your example that you used earlier about your car. I can say something about a circle of control, and a circle of influence might be my car, because something you can influence the outcome of your car, getting it maintenance regularly, making sure that you have good tires on your car, regular checkups, maintenance. Those are things you're influencing. But I can also see there's things control. I control how fast the car goes. I can control the direction the car's going. I can control aspects of the vehicle. And so this just kind of helped, at least me, start thinking in terms of how do you separate one circle from the other? And I just thought it was interesting. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation, that it was kind of a different way to almost qualify the different circles.
Well, and I think that is really, that's where our power comes from, is to be able to say and pour our energy into the things that we can control, and be able to responsibly exercise influence where we can. That's where our true power lies, is to be able to not only recognize a difference, but then use that appropriately. Now, if you move out to the outer circle, my friend, literally it's everything else. Everything else lies outside in that circle.
So this is the circle that I can't remember in the training what they called it, but I call it the casual observer, because there's really not a lot you can do other than just observe.
Yes. I call this the dumpster fire circle. No, I'm just kidding. No, this is where you have no control and no influence. So if you, I always, I found this the easiest to relate to, if I thought about it in comical, out of this world ways, right? I have zero influence over the stock market, like none. I have less than none influence in the stock market. I have negative influence in the weather. I have no say over the weather. There's nothing I can do to stop the cold front that's going to bring 3 feet of snow to my house. None. There's nothing. Politics, terrorism, really TV programming. I'm trying to think. Oh, crime, the thoughts and feelings and actions of other people.
Okay, now that's a hard one for me, because that was, I mean, that's the thread that connected all the different circles for me. And when I was going through this, when you boiled it down and you really got to that casual observer circle, that's where this lived, and I challenged every way I could. And it was the hardest one for me to do, because not that I want to control people, but I thought, no, there's things that you can do to influence, push them. I mean, I just got done saying in my job, well, that's in a specific state. Let me go to these business partners when they're not in a session, when they're intending, the whole purpose is for me to get these requirements out of them. And so they almost allow that influence to happen. If I went to their space where they're doing their everyday job and I said, okay, I'm going to start influencing how you do your work, that would not go over very well. That is like a lead balloon. And it really took that kind of aha moment for me to really understand there's some times that the people that I'm working with, they allow me to have that influence because of the environment and the circumstances that we are in the moment. And that can even go into the circle of control. But where it really lives 90% of the time, 95% of the time, is in that outer circle, which is the casual observer. That was a very hard concept for me to learn. And probably the last one that I was able to even, I'm not going to say master, but even get proficient with.
What I really like about what you have called or labeled this as casual observer. And here's why I like that so much. If you think about your Facebook page, you can find someone who puts an awful lot of energy into the things that are in this outer circle. I have had friends on Facebook who are constantly like posting articles about the various crimes that are happening. Oh my God, what's happening? The whole world is falling apart. Or that friend who is like, oh, the planet is imploding because look, there was another natural disaster in Timbuktu, right? I mean, you can think about, or those people who are constantly posting lots of inflammatory political things, saying, whatever it is that they're saying. So much energy being poured into places we have zero control or influence. So what I like about the title Casual Observer is that feeling like, because often when these are those things, if I'm focusing too much energy on these things, I'm not casual anymore. And I get pretty worked up over those things, and I get pretty frustrated about those things. And then I am neglecting to put any sort of energy into the places that I can control. And that's where I need to, because when I'm spending too much time in that outer circle, I'm neglecting what's on the inner circle. And that's where I need to be focusing, is my thoughts, my feelings, and my actions, and making sure that I'm doing what I need to do to care for myself.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going to go next, is that in my training, again, in IT, it was about
So
how
bizarre.
you can, it is so bizarre. It is about how the way that these circles were, and one was inlaid in the other one. So you had the really small one that was the control, and then outside of that, you could see the circle of influence, and then outside of that is the casual observer. And what was really interesting is that as you move away from that bullseye or the center, the less involvement you should really be having. I mean, when you're talking about the circle of control, you're in it. Like, these are things that you have firsthand, your hands in all the different pies. You're navigating the waters. You are to be present. You are supposed to be, right there in the thick of things. You leave that inner circle and you go into the influence, and that's where you can kind of, take maybe the passenger seat. So to put that into an analogy, circle of control, you're in the driver's seat. You're responsible for where the vehicle's going. You're seeing all of the surroundings. You're navigating. You're doing it all. You're making sure everybody in the car is safe. You're making sure the speed is being maintained. You're taking all the safety precautions. All of it is you. When you get to the circle of influence, that's more of maybe a passenger, right? You can maybe tell the driver, hey, take a right here, because I know where we're going. I can give you directions, so you can influence where the car is going. You might be able to influence some of the surroundings, but some of the interior things you can contribute to. Where I call the casual observer, that's the back seat, where really just sit down, be quiet, and enjoy the ride. And it's kind of cool to see how you can go from being the one that's solely responsible, and you're meant to be the one responsible, all the way to someone in the back seat where the only expectation of you is just sit back and enjoy the ride. And so that was kind of a neat concept also to kind of put into perspective. And when they used that car analogy, that's what kind of sealed it for me, that I'm like, okay, now I'm really starting to understand the differences between these different circles and how I can start trying to navigate them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'll tell you what, just learning about the circles of control has affected my relationships in the most impactful ways, especially those close relationships. When I was finally able to say, I have no say or control in that other person's thoughts, feelings, and actions, then it made it easier to accept their thoughts, their feelings, and their actions as theirs, because I have no control over it anyway. It doesn't have to hurt me if I don't let it hurt me. You know what I'm saying?
I do. And for me, it was, I don't, when I put down the responsibility of owning that of other people, it freed up my time to start focusing on things that I should be focusing on. And suddenly I felt like my mind was clearer. My
Mm-hmm.
shoulders weren't as heavy. And some of those relationships that were strained, they were strained because I was trying to do things that they were supposed to be doing. I was trying to control individuals that I really had no business to control, and they knew it. I just was the one that didn't know it. But once I got it and I started applying them, and some of that pressure started getting released from those relationships, some of them really did improve and became 180 from where they were. And I'm very thankful for those opportunities, because had it not been for me learning these, I think those relationships would have been damaged and or severed. And some of them were saved because I started becoming aware of, that's not for me to own, and I have to be comfortable with somebody else doing it. And that was kind of cool.
Well, and I can say that this tool is probably a capstone in my relationship with my children because it helped me focus away from trying to control everything that they do, everyone that they hang out with that may not be the best influence, or everything that they think, and really helped me shift my focus more toward influencing them to be able to do that for themselves, to be able to say, okay, this is not a good space for me, and I'm going to control my actions, or, this is not a good headspace for me. So I'm going to do what I need to do to shift my perspective, and really gave me the tools that I needed in order to not just maintain or build a healthy relationship with them, but to help them build those healthy relationships for themselves too. I mean, this was a really influential tool in my family's life.
Oh yeah, some of the things that I've caught myself even saying to my kids is that something you should be trying to control? You don't like that aspect, but is that something that you should be responsible for fixing, or is that something that you're supposed to just be observing and maybe don't take everything as a personal agenda for you to go and conquer? And I say that because that's the feelings I had to overcome. So I say that to them not because I feel like I can look down, but because I said I've been through that. I've been through the process of being self-aware all the way to understanding what I should be controlling versus what I should just be observing, and letting some things go. That still is, although I didn't learn what the relapsing was, that's probably where I have the biggest relapse, is learning to let some things go. Identifying it's one thing, but really letting it not be my responsibility anymore. I struggle at times, and I do go back and forth, and so try to teach that and show that to the kids as well, because it takes a lot of energy too, and you get exhausted and tired and run down. For me, at least, it's probably because I'm trying to control too much that I'm not supposed to be anymore.
Well, and so often it's emotional control. It's not even like, it's not even, I think for you it probably is some of that physical work, right? It's you taking ownership of things at work that maybe you don't need to be doing because it's someone else's job or someone else's responsibility, or no one asked you to do it. For me, it's so much of it is emotional. Like me stop trying to letting go of emotional control of situations that I have no part of, to be able to be okay with my kid making a decision that I might not agree with. And so it has been, this is another one though, just like radical acceptance. Sometimes you have to go through it again and again and again. And every time I look at this with someone that I'm helping or someone that I'm teaching about peer support, I always glean something out of it again and remind myself, okay, so what are those things that I'm trying to take control of that don't belong to me? And how do I pour my energy elsewhere so that I can have the ability to have some influence? Because if I'm not controlling the things that I need to control, I'm probably in no space to have any influence over anybody else at that point either. So
Now I wouldn't go that far. No, just kidding.
You're like, and there I'm done.
No, I think it's just I'm even reminiscing now over the process that I went through, and after hearing kind of what yours was like and what you've kind of put together, it's it's so cool to kind of see it in action from a different lens and how it can be applied. I know we've said this before, and again, I don't want to keep repeating myself. It's amazing to see how well it fits in all these different scenarios. So one thing I want to bring up, Jamie, I don't know if you have anything left from your perspective or from your training. I do want to just mention, it feels like this is a good time. There was a book that went along with my training, and so maybe in our show notes we can put a link to it. I just want to mention it here because I read this book, and it's been a while ago. And I don't know if you've ever heard of it before, but it's called The 7 Habits of a Highly Effective People. And I'm gonna mess his last name up unless you know it, but I think it's pronounced Covey. But it's Stephen R. Covey's the author. Again, I'd like to put a link in there in our show notes for somebody that's interested in kind of seeing what that book's about. But that was a really powerful book, and the managers at my job got a hold of it, so we all had to kind of read it. But it's been a while since I've actually picked it up and read through it, so I might have to do that again. But have you ever heard of that book or read that book?
My mother purchased this book for me. I think I was in 6th grade. Maybe I was in 7th grade. I feel like it was like a summer reading project. She wanted us to go through it together because I think she really recognized at a young age that I had a desire
Control
to
problem?
right. Like, oh, she's my budding control freak. This is what I'm thinking. But it has been so long since I've read through that book. But after you and I kind of chatted about, doing this as a topic for our episode, I used one of my Audible credits and downloaded it. So I will be refreshing myself with that one too.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's been a while since I read it, but it was a really, I remember it being an easy read from the point of it was interesting, so I kept wanting to go through it. But yeah, I'm gonna pick it back up and start going through it myself. But we'll have a link to a book, not to purchase. I mean, we're not trying to sell anything, but just so people can see the book we're talking about and check it out. But no, I didn't mean to cut you off or anything, Jamie. I know from my perspective that I covered everything from my piece, so I don't know if you have any other pieces from your training I mean, if there's another piece, let's keep going. But that was pretty much the breadth of all of my training and the experience that I've had going through those different circles.
Well, I developed a training with these tools, but it was to train peer support staff and how to utilize them in working with families. So I've given you all that I have this evening. So
no, I think I think it's really cool that we were able to mirror so much of what we have. I mean, yes, they were called something different, but and probably applied differently, but still they're the same things. And these building blocks have been amazing for me and transformative in me personally, professionally, and in the relationships that I've had. And it's kind of cool to hear you say it from your work too. And I'm kind of excited for us to maybe keep talking about these in other aspects of not only our podcast here, but even of our lives, because I still find things today where I can apply them where I didn't think I would be able to. And it keeps reminding me, where are you at, Mahlon? That's the question that keeps coming up. Are you in that circle of control? Should you be there? Are you an influencer? Are you supposed to be a casual observer? Get back to where you're supposed to be. And so that keeps coming back in my head. So that'll be fun.
Just promise, and I will do the same. Promise that you won't be upset with me when I'm like, Mahlon, where does that fall in your circles?
As long as you're not doing it facetiously, we will be fine.
Oh, never facetious. I mean, it might not be like all hearts and flowers, but
Jamie's like, it's not gonna be mean. I mean, I will have a salt shaker with me just for good sakes. No, we can be accountability partners for one another. They'll be good.
I do think that this is going to be a good foundation of knowledge and a good understanding for some of the topics that we're going to look at moving forward. So I'm glad we went through this together.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, I know there's things in my mind already that we are going to be touching on that this will probably be revived over and over again because it's such a good lens to look at things from.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, for sure. So yeah, thanks for listening to me this evening, my friend, and sharing your own perspective in that and helping me realize that, some of these truths are universal.
Very much so.
It was fun.
All right. Until next time.
Yeah.
See you later.
We'll see you again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This podcast was recorded and edited by Jamie and Mahlon. Music by Famous Cats. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please email us at roundtablemindset@gmail.com. Text or call us at 402-819-8999 or join the conversation on Facebook at Roundtable Mindset Podcast.
And never miss a new episode by making sure you like, subscribe, and share wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for being our guest today. See you next time at the Roundtable. And remember, your opinions and perspectives matter and are appreciated, but might not always be shared by others, and that's okay.